It's time to get off the sidelines and get into the fray. My name's Erik Mansur, and I'm your host for the Product Marketing Alliance's podcast dedicated to all things competitive intelligence. So my day job is VP of Product Marketing at Crayon, which, by the way, is a job function that I didn't graduate from college with a bachelor's degree. See, a lot of us product marketers either germinate from within content marketing or product management or customer success. And the lady that I'm thrilled to speak with on this episode was born in the crucible of corporate strategy, right from the get-go. Her name is Penny Moran, and she's currently the head of competitive intelligence for Zuora, having spent years doing this type of work for companies like Nortel Networks and Intuit, Texas Instruments, just to name a few. Now, throughout her career, she's improved the competitive posture for countless sales teams, consulted with executive leadership on making sound decisions for the future of companies, and she's had a huge impact on broader business strategy for nearly every single one of the logos on her CV. But today, we won't be talking as much about competitive intelligence, but another critical offshoot of that role, one that many product marketers now realize is going to be part of their job soon if it isn't already. And that's analyze your company's win-loss and competitive success. Win-loss projects or programs can be a driver of meaningful change in each of the areas that I mentioned earlier, helping to augment sales, go-to-market strategies, and informing the growth path for an organization. But while win-loss analysis is pretty closely related to CI, I was curious to hear from Penny how it all started for her. What was her first exposure to win-loss analysis? Was it a project that she had considered doing on her own, or was there an underlying business need?
When I joined my current company, I've had years of experience doing competitive intelligence, but when I joined this company, I was being pushed in the direction of, align with the sales team, start setting up debriefs on some of the deals to understand what's happening in the deals. And that was sort of the win-loss program. Well, from my prior experience at other companies, I worked at a company, a big company a long time ago, where the culture was really about voice of the customer. Mm-hmm. And I was very close to it because in my competitive intelligence role there, I was aligned in the same team with our primary market researchers that were talking to customers every day. So I was very, very close to it. And I know how important and powerful customer feedback can be. And so I knew something was missing, that was not the right answer, for me to look at things just internally. So I started digging in through competitive intelligence resources I have online, looking at best practices. And that's how I became exposed to win-loss analysis, and realized that, yes, there's value in having those conversations internally with your account teams, but they tend to be a little bit biased, and not only biased, but they don't always know why they won or why they lost. And when you bring in the external, talking to the customer directly part of things, some really great insights come out of that.
That's really interesting. I think sometimes you hear, win-loss analysis, it's we have a business need, we got to go figure it out. And from your perspective, it was, let's just listen to the voice of the customers. It was a bit more of a pragmatic approach to saying, let's just put our ear to the ground and find out what our customers are saying. And from there, let the data be our guide. It was quite a bit more even altruistic to sort of pay more attention to what was happening with closed opportunities than it was just trying to tick a box and let the sales team know what they're doing right or wrong, right?
That's right. That's exactly what happened.
That's awesome. What were the outcomes from that first project? What was the, did you ruffle any feathers? Did you end up having a meeting that turned, I don't want to say contentious, but turned a little bit more like, oh gosh, I can't believe what we just found out. Like, this is revelatory. Like, what was that moment like?
Yeah. So before I answer that question directly, you used the term project. Mm-hmm. I like to use the term program. So when I took this on, what my intent was to build a world-class win-loss intelligence program. And so that it wasn't, to me, a project is kind of a one-time thing.
Sure.
That you go work on and then you're done. This is not done. This is an ongoing program that I have built to do quarterly to continue to bring insights. And so after I do it quarterly. The first one, I created a report to deliver the insights. And then I also Aside from that, got with each of the functional product leaders to report out in their leadership team meetings the insights to try and drive action. And so the very first one was very well received, and they liked what they were seeing. But I think it really didn't get a lot of traction until the second quarter that I delivered it, because then we started to be able to see trends. The trends are hugely important.
Right. So, and I'm going to put a pin in the project versus process thing. So we're definitely coming back to that. But what you're saying is, the first time was revelatory insofar as, hey, we never had this information before. But the second time was even more so because you could draw a straight line between what you learned the first time to the second time. And then I'm assuming third, fourth, fifth times, it becomes incredibly beneficial to those stakeholders who are seeing this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the stakeholders are obviously leadership in terms of, what actions do we need to take to continue to improve, but also the sellers themselves. And so, I saw a little bit of hesitancy on their part at first when I would reach out to them just to confirm contacts and things like that, because sometimes they might look at the program negatively, like, oh, you're just spying on me and you're just monitoring my performance and things like that. But once they started to see the insights that came out of it, the sellers, they love it. So it took some time to kind of build up that level of confidence and for sellers to feel good about, hey, there's value in this. It's going to help me in my future deals and help increase my win rates if I understand what I need to tweak going forward.
That's really fascinating that well, I shouldn't say that. I would say that in my experience, sales reps, account executives, by and large, do like to sort of stay in their own lane, do their own thing. They will come to go to a product marketer, go to a sales enablement person and ask for something as opposed to them, AEs or sales reps, being asked for something by the other side. So I do understand that reticence. What were some of the other pushback? I mean, I presume it was, hey, this is already a closed account. I don't want you to unearth any of the potential objections they had before. Like, I don't want to lead to churn. Like that's my initial thought. What were some of the other areas of pushback that you got from sales reps?
Yeah, I didn't get a whole lot of pushback, but oftentimes when I looked in our CRM system, I could see in the closed notes that they said they were still trying to get feedback from the lost prospect. And, I've been trying to educate and enable them to say, hey, that's great, but put this account through this program because we use an external consultant, and our external consultant, she's skilled in these kinds of interviews, and she knows how to get below the surface and get the insights and go broader and deeper than they can do on their own. And so I try to educate them about that. But the pushback question, I think sometimes they feel like even though the prospect has determined they're not going to go our way, they feel like it's not a done deal and that there's still the opportunity to change their minds.
But they spent so much time building that level of rapport, probably traded mobile phone numbers. They've got, they think in their mind that this, a closed lost deal is never really closed lost.
Exactly.
So they want to keep it on their ledger or in their contact list, and try to leverage that rapport to get answers. But sometimes, we say analysis. This is ultimately a scientific pursuit. So let's have the scientist ask the pointed and sort of structured questions to get the answers we really want. That's not going to say you don't get to keep this relationship, but for this purpose, let's put the experts in play. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Awesome. So talking about that win-loss project, I've heard companies describe it as a way to answer questions about themselves that they really didn't want to ask. It is, what's wrong with our product, or, what's going on with our go-to-market and how can we fix it? Why do people hate our pricing structure as compared to other companies? Or why does our ideal customer bristle at this notion of the length of the contract? Would you say that enterprise companies now, in your experience, are more willing to ask those questions? Or is there's still a bit of a learning curve getting stakeholders to take a hard look at what it is they're doing, things that they've already created and they feel confident in?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the culture of the company. I've been fortunate enough to have worked at several companies where it was really important to understand below the surface what's going on. Why are these customers choosing us, or why are they choosing our competitors? And so they were very open to that. And I think especially at the enterprise level that, who doesn't want stronger win rates? And this all feeds that. And so the openness is, let's learn, let's continuously improve and drive action so that we can optimize our win rates.
So characteristics. I like that we're touching upon this because you mentioned openness, but isn't willingness to change another characteristic? Like not just openness to hearing the feedback, but also a characteristic of, hey, if there's an amalgamation, if there's a cacophony of voices that says one thing, we should take a look at doing that thing, right? Is that another? What are some of the other ones that you've seen?
I mean, I think it goes back to the trends. So, I've been doing this now for several quarters. And so I'm seeing the same recurring themes come up quarter after quarter, like as it relates to maybe pricing model or things like that. And so, when it's repetitive and we're hearing that voice of the customer over and over again, obviously it's something that needs to be looked at and action items need to be formed to change that. And so I think that that's where that willingness to change comes from, and that, the status quo is not working.
How do you get beyond, because you've talked about this now a couple of times, this notion of doing it quarter over quarter, step by step, getting a trend line. How do you go from somebody either dismissing the feedback as anecdotal, oh, you only talk to X amount, and get to that perfect amount of interviews per quarter in order to say, no, this is a legitimate trend. There is data sufficiency. Like, how is there a number, or is it a percentage? Like, how do you get to that level of data sufficiency within each quarter?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So when I started the program, I went through some training through SCIP, the Society of Competitive Intelligence Professionals, that was very valuable to help me get this program off the ground. I learned so much from that course. But one of the best practices they talked about was having a sample size of about 20. Mm-hmm. So, being all eager and ambitious to put this program in place, that was my goal, was to get to 20.
It's got to be 20. Like, first time through, it's like we're going to hit the mark, right?
But the reality is, in enterprise, we don't have, the volume of deals in my company anyway, to really get to that number in a quarter. And so I ended up with a smaller number as a starting point. And every quarter, I have a goal of trying to increase it by a few more and get closer to that 20. I still haven't hit it, honestly. Wow. But, in fact, I just did our latest report. I combined 2 quarters together to get a bigger sample size.
Interesting.
But the key thing is that I really want to emphasize is having the program be not just qualitative from the interview itself, but also quantitative. And so one of those best practices that I learned was how to build the quantitative piece. And so when I started the program, I got together with each of the functional leaders and asked them to define some KPIs that they want to measure. And once we landed on that list, I worked with our consultants to help her know how to integrate that into the interview. So the process we set up was we ask the buyer to complete a KPI survey in advance of the interview. And there's maybe 20 KPIs, but it's just providing ratings. And so it's not a long survey.
Right.
And so when the consultant gets on the call with the buyer, she's already seen those ratings, and it allows her to adapt her script a little bit and go deeper on those where they maybe rated us really low or even really high to understand the perceptions underneath those ratings. And so what that has allowed me to do, back to your original question, is create a trend line. So in my reporting, I have trend lines of the average ratings for each of these KPIs over time based on, in a given quarter, let's say we had 15 interviews, there's a mix of half of them are wins, half of them are losses. And I have an average rating overall and an average rating for just the wins and an average rating for just the losses. And we can trend how those KPIs on average are doing over time.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention, this is the Product Marketing Alliance's podcast network after all, that my good friend Alex McDonald does a similar course on win-loss analysis. And he talks about quantitative versus qualitative in a very similar way. I think what you've just described is not only are those valuable quantitative metrics, but they also provide a conversation starter when you get into the qualitative. So it's literally a way for you to begin from a place of knowledge as opposed to going in cold, which can obviously be sometimes off-putting for the customer, the buyer, but also make it much more challenging for the interviewer, right?
Right. And our interviewer, she's very experienced in this, and she limits the interview to 20 minutes, which doesn't seem very long, but she already has those ratings in advance. So she knows what areas she wants to dig into. And it's a smaller ask on the buyer's part for 20 minutes of their time.
And really, it probably goes on the calendar as 30. And if the buyer is engaged, they want to keep talking, it'll get to 25 minutes sometimes, right? I have to believe that part of the ask is only a small portion of your time. But if things go well, then so be it. We'll get some more data, right?
Right.
That's amazing. Do you receive recordings of these interviews? And if so, do you listen to them, or do you much prefer to see the qualitative data and the quantitative data sort of like just on a spreadsheet? Or do you want to hear sort of the emotion in the responses themselves? Because tone isn't always conveyed in a spreadsheet, right?
Yeah. So when we set up the process, our consultant was very explicit about not using recordings because it puts the interviewee on edge. It's just not something that she likes to do. Sure. And so the output I get is really just a PDF document that is a write-up of the script and the responses, but I don't know how she does it. Photographic memory, I'm not sure what she does, but she captures the verbatims perfectly.
It's pretty remarkable. Even now, to this day, when somebody hears, a Zoom recording saying this call is being recorded, people are like, oh, okay, well, I have to be on my best behavior. And in your researcher's mind, she's thinking to herself, this is going to be much more free flowing if there isn't that little blinking red light in the top right-hand corner, right?
Right.
We talked a little bit about rapport building. I have to believe that your researcher will come in from a place of knowledge, but then within 20 minutes needs to get this person talking effusively and build a relationship, build a rapport, and get quality data within a very short amount of time. Is there any additional information that you provide her with prior to her going into those conversations, like perhaps close lost or close won notes from your CRM, or any additional data about the deal itself? Or does she try to do it simply based on the survey responses?
So the only information, we have a tracking spreadsheet that she and I use as sort of a way to communicate, so she knows when to pull the trigger to invite somebody. But the only information I really provide her with is who the primary competitor was in the deal that we won against or we lost against. Really no other information. So she starts just with that and with the survey ratings. So that's pretty much it.
But that's okay, right? Because she's ultimately trying to dive into the questions that the prospect or the customer had answered, and not anything more beyond that, not any feelings that the AE may have had. It's just based on data, and we'll do 20 minutes just like that.
Right. And in the interview script, it was important to me to build in the Net Promoter question at the end. And so my company has a whole Net Promoter program that's run by somebody else in the company, but that is only used with our existing customer base. With my program, with the win-loss, we have a mix, 50-50 roughly in any given quarter, of net new customers as well as lost prospects. And so we're asking just the net promoter question, not coming up with a net promoter score overall, just asking them to do a rating on the net promoter scale of 0 to 10 on how they view us, how likely they are to recommend us. And that is always interesting, because what comes out of that, I find that we have lost prospects where we didn't win the deal, but they're promoters of our company. And so that gives a good insight of, hey, we did a really good job in the sales process. We really left a good impression, and you never know. They might come back to us in the future if they go to another company where it might be a better fit or whatever the case may be. Secondly, in addition to asking them for a rating, we ask them, what would it take for you to provide a higher net promoter rating? And so that gives insights into what else we could be doing to raise their score even higher.
It's the question, why did you answer the way you did, except spun a different way? What is something we could do that would make you change your answer to something higher?
Right. So that's interesting. And then another question I have towards the end as well. So after we go through all the KPIs and all the kind of functional areas that we're trying to learn about, there's also a question at the end around, what were your top 2 to 3 decision drivers for choosing us or choosing the competitor? And a lot of times what they say there will be repetitive of what came out earlier in the interview, but that kind of just puts a bow on it and wraps up, why did we win or why did we lose? And that gives some great insights as well. But our consultant then just ends with the net promoter questions and saying, is there anything else we didn't talk about that you want to share?
It's interesting that sometimes the net promoter score is high, 8, 9, 10, even with lost prospects.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that provides another layer of detail for you as well. So so sometimes you'll see closed lost opportunities come in, and it's product or pricing or whatever. But in the back of your mind, in the back of some leader's mind, it's like, perhaps the seller didn't, go at this transaction appropriately enough. Perhaps they didn't lean into some of the content we provided. Any number of different reasons that could lay it at the feet of the person, human error. But when you get those scores that come back and say, no, I built a great rapport with the person that I was speaking to. It just came down to literally a binary between this or this. It's had nothing to do with the person itself. That actually helps, really cut through a lot of the crap, for the lack of a better term, with, who could be at fault. And it literally says, no, they liked us. They just didn't want to buy us for X reason, the exact reason why they told us, right?
Absolutely. And I tell our sellers that, it can't feel good to them to lose a deal and then see that the prospect gave us a 8, 9, or 10 on the net promoter scale.
I would even say, doesn't it feel better, because it's definitely not, well, it's not definitely not, but generally not their fault. It's a company structure thing that caused the lost opportunity, and not necessarily their job in explaining, right?
Right. And, like I said earlier, it may be that prospect comes back to us in the future. So, there's always that. If they go to a competitor and the competitor fails, they may be back.
I think the most optimistic people I've ever worked with in my career are sales reps, because it's never a closed door, right?
Right.
One of the things you mentioned earlier, Penny, was this notion, I used the word project, and that is my mistake. But I do think that a lot of competitive intelligence experts or product marketers will begin this from a let's do this once and see what happens approach. You yourself you've always set out to say, no, this is going to be something recurring. But it's not outside the realm of possibility that a pretty overworked product marketer, competitive intelligence person is going to say, let's give this a go. Let's throw things against the wall to see if it sticks. I've heard a lot that doing anything the first time is always the hardest. And then for each subsequent time, it gets a little bit easier. You had mentioned that it was easier to do it the second time because you would set out to do this in a repeated way, but also you got better data coming out the other side.
Right.
Do you think that there was a need or was it necessary to sort of remake the case, or, oh yeah, we are doing this again and we're going to do it again and again and again? Did you feel like you had to make the case a second or third time, or you set out from the jump and said, no, this is going to be a recurring project?
No, I set out from
process.
the beginning. Yeah, I set out from the beginning it was going to be recurring. And like I said, once the business started to see the results from it, I had sellers kind of coming along the way. Instead of me proactively reaching out to them to say, hey, I'd like to include your deal in the program, confirm the contacts. I had some sellers coming to me and saying, hey, could you put this deal in the program? So
that was by the second time, because they had heard the results of the first time, and they were like, oh, I'm ready for you to do this with my closed prospects.
Right. And so that was rewarding for me to have them now bringing deals to me.
Yeah, that's got to be incredible. And not only rewarding, but also telling you that, hey, the first time went so well that now there's a groundswell of support from amongst the sales team to say, no, I actually really legitimately want this data,
Right. Absolutely.
You could certainly see it from the other side, though, right? You have the great fortune of working at great companies with great values of openness and willingness to change. But there are some listeners to this podcast who I'm sure work for companies that are a bit more challenging in those value propositions. If they can get the buy-in to do it the first time, what would be some of the suggestions you would make to get buy-in to do it the second time, particularly if the first time didn't exactly set the world on fire, and if it did, it led to some challenging conversations?
Yeah. So I think this is pretty well known within at least the competitive intelligence community, is that you can't just share data. You've got to share insights. And so when I did this the first time, the thing that took me probably the longest was putting together a presentation deck to share the insights and coming up with the insights. Because I was analyzing the KPI ratings, I was analyzing the qualitative, putting together what were the key themes that emerged across this group of interviews. And it just took a lot of time to get that right and get it into a format that I felt was worthy of sharing with executives. And so that was where I doubled down. And I've tweaked it every quarter. I think I have tweaked it and improved it and have gotten it better and better and better. But I think the quality of the insights and, the ability to share them in leadership meetings was what helped to really get that buy-in quarter after quarter.
That's interesting. And I think that is, and you make mention of this notion that competitive intelligence, just the data point itself, for many teams, for many people within those teams, is useless. You need to provide additional context and, what does this mean for us, an interpretation of it. So what you're saying is, with a win-loss process or program, just raw data is useless. You need to provide your educated thoughts around why this happened, or your best guesses around what to do next or what to adjust as results from of these data points, right?
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, when I did it the first couple of quarters, I spent endless hours sifting through the qualitative verbatims to try and come up with key themes. And I finally, after a couple of quarters, decided to purchase some software that would do it for me to make it a lot easier, that imports all the PDF documents. And then, you've got to go through and code phrases and words to categories, but then it pops out the key themes very easily.
That is awesome. But I have to ask, let's say you do 18 interviews in a quarter. I know that is the hope. You can get up to 20, but let's say 18. 9 answer a question one way, 9 answer the other way. How do you provide that level of interpretation when there's seemingly two data sets that are fighting with one another? Like, how have you gotten yourself to that, or have you found yourself in that moment where it's like, these two things are dichotomous? How do you get a path forward, or at least figure out what the key insight to take away from seeming data that seemingly disagrees with itself?
Yeah, I don't think I've run into that too much, but I definitely, we're a global company. So I'm looking at a mix of interviews across different regions, also across different verticals that we serve. And so sometimes if I see those dichotomies, which I haven't seen that too much, I'll look and see, is this a theme that's coming up in a specific geographical region or within a specific vertical?
That's interesting. So you would prefer to go one click deeper. So rather than just closed customers, it's, hey, let's look at closed customers in a particular silo of a vertical or a region or any number of different characteristics. Rather than just a sort of a broad look, you like going that one click deeper because I'm guessing that's where you can get really actionable insight and like, here's how we go forward in this vertical or in this region around the world.
Yeah. I mean, I take a global view every quarter, but for example, with the latest report that I just shared with leadership, I had our Europe sales leader reach out and say, hey, this is great, but can you give me a view just for Europe? And so I did that click down, and it was interesting because it looked very different than the overall global. So, they were killing it in the sales experience. These were the prospects that were giving net promoter scores of 8s, 9s,
and 10s, right? They loved working with their sales reps.
So there were, in doing that analysis on a geographic region, I saw, well, here's some other opportunities where we can push on and continue to improve.
That's wild. So globally, you got one set of insights, but North America and EMEA, you got two different sets of insights. And
yes,
it's incredibly directional for that European sales leader. So, okay, great. We're doing good things here. Here's some other stuff we can tweak. And perhaps the opposite on the North American side.
Right.
That's incredible. Incredible. In business, we talk about this notion of maturity. How much expertise a person has or a department has in doing a certain task. Now, sometimes that word is used to describe frequency. How often have I done something, repeated and renewed it over time? Is a win-loss program's maturity based on how often you've done it, or is it based on the expertise that you have as a practitioner? I'm curious, is it a combination of both? Like, I'm curious as to when you consider your program of a high maturity level, is that because of the dirt underneath your fingernails over time, or just the fact that it's been done and the team has now come to expect it as part of their daily lives?
Yeah, so I don't think it's a real black and white answer. I think the maturity depends on how formal the program is. So for some organizations, when we started our talk today, I talked about that I was pushed in the direction of going and listening to deal debriefs with the account teams. For some companies, that's a win-loss program.
Right.
But to me, that would be very, very immature because it's only internal focus. There's no external focus in talking actually to customers. So taking it to that next level of building it out externally would be more mature. Also, some companies might just focus on one area, trying to understand where they could do better and go to market, for example. Once you get into a holistic program like mine, where it's cutting across, perceptions around the company, around the sales experience, around the product, and around services, then it's, to me, that's a more mature program where it's holistic. And then I'd say the last thing is what we were just talking about a minute ago is you're taking it to the point where you're delivering some rich insights from what you learned. It's one thing to just deliver the data, but you've got to take it to the insights level. And I think the most mature program is when you have a formal external program where you're getting voice of the customer on a recurring basis. You're capturing insights holistically about your business, and you're delivering those insights to the leaders.
So just to run that back, repeatable, something that's going to happen every quarter like clockwork, something that is external. So it includes additional information that isn't just simply captured by an account executive, and holistic. It's something that every department could seemingly get insights from. And crucially, the insights themselves are not just data points. They are, well thought out interpretations of the data that every stakeholder, regardless of department, can sort of take something away from, right?
Absolutely. So completely cross-functional. Yeah. I mean, another area, that I built in was around customer references. So we have a customer references program at my company. And so we have a question in the interview to ask whether they used any customer references. And then also, it's not a KPI, so we're not asking for a KPI rating, but we are asking how important were those customer references in your decision? So then, I feed that into our customer reference leader to understand what a difference these customer references are making. So that's just one example.
So seemingly any process, project, anything that is happening, repeatable or otherwise, within a company, you can ascertain through the course of these interviews the success or lack thereof. So that's just one microcosmic example. The notion of getting using a customer, whether it be a case study or a direct reference, in order to influence the deal. But any number of different things. Right? Did you access the website first? Did you download a piece of content? Like any number of different aspects can be found out and used as insightful data points, right?
Yeah. And I mean, and on that note, that's another one. We have an analyst relations person, and they wanted to put some questions in to understand how did this prospect do their vendor research before they got into the deal cycle.
Did you consult with Forrester or Gartner? Did you look at IDC? Did you look at Capterra or Trustpilot or whatever, right?
Exactly. So we ask all those questions, and what comes out of that is, I mean, I've learned, because I've been doing this on a repeatable quarter after quarter basis, that not only do they look at those things, but they talk to their peers, their peer companies.
Right.
Or they had previous experience with our company or our product, or they worked at another company where they used it, or they had knowledge of it somehow. Some of them are using consultants. So all these things come out in the interview that we didn't even specifically ask.
It's awesome. I mean, it seems like the sky is the limit. I mean, there's no end to the amount of information you can gather and the amount of process change that a program like this could influence, right? I mean, literally anything under the sun. And the only reason why that works is because it is cross-functional and people are all the way bought in.
You got it.
That being said, there are certainly some listeners who would love to put together a win-loss program. They haven't even started yet. They are the dictionary definition of either an immature program or, quite frankly, a premature program. What is the best way for them to get started? Is it finding a key stakeholder and sort of going in this together as a partnership? Is it, giving it their college try and coming up with some great insights, getting the meeting together and having a step forward? Like what is the best way to sort of move the ball forward just with the first time through before it becomes a repeatable process?
Right. I think the best way to get started is to just familiarize yourself with some of the best practices. There's so much out there on all of these websites like Skip and other CI vendor websites on best practices. So familiarize yourself with those as a starting point and start thinking about a process. So the beauty of the training I went through with Skip was they gave us a process. Now, I've had to adapt some things in it to my company.
Of course.
But for the most part, I am following that process. And it was hugely helpful to have that process in place to start building it. Before you start taking it out into the company, you've got to have a plan. You've got to have a process. But I would also suggest trying to get, to your point, a stakeholder or an executive sponsor on board to help kind of build the momentum for it. I had to, start going out to each of the cross-functional leaders to start building out what KPIs do we want to measure. So you've got to have some buy-in there.
Sure. So I guess the answer would be find a stakeholder. But they don't necessarily need to find every single stakeholder. You could start with a few choice members of the broader team. And then by the second time you do it, you're going to be able to get buy-in from others because they're seeing the value. Don't boil the ocean the first time, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess that leads me to my follow-up question, which is, let's say let's say a product marketer, competitive intelligence expert, person who works in corporate strategy has gotten the first one done. For them, it was a project, but they want to make it a process. Unlike Penny, they didn't set out to make this thing repeatable. How do they go back and do it again? Do they just say, hey, this is now, we did it Q1, we're going to try it again, we're going to do it again Q2? Is it going back to the same stakeholder and saying, hey, let's run this back? Is it starting to expand then? Or, how would you think through that as somebody who, as a product marketer who perhaps gave this the old college try the first time and wants to see if they can do it again?
Yeah, I would say just do it. But having said that, after doing it the first time, I think it's an opportunity to go back to some of these cross-functional leaders. And now that they've seen one set of insights, to see if there's anything they want to tweak on the KPIs. I had after 2 or 3 quarters in, I had some of them say, hey, I'd like to add some additional KPIs now that we then introduce later.
Interesting.
So there's an opportunity to tweak what you did and continue to evolve the program or project.
But that makes it even more inclusive though, right? So after the first time through, you go back to your stakeholders and say, what more can we do? And it gets them even more bought into the process. Now they're like, oh, okay, this is going to be a recurring thing. I want to make sure I get my stuff in there as well. And that contributes to a broader departmental buy-in, right?
Absolutely.
I love it. You, as we talked about at the top of the show, you started in sort of market competitive intelligence, have evolved to being an expert and sort of the champion of a mature competitive win-loss program. Is there a world where win-loss is somebody's or perhaps your only job and you do nothing else but really understanding the voice of the customer, getting that up into a 20 or 30 responses per quarter range? Like, is there a world where you do this full-time for life, that this is a thing that you're going to want to do? Or do you like having the competitive intelligence side as well, sort of tying these two things together?
The latter. I like tying the two things together and having all of the other parts of my role in competitive intelligence as well, because I learn things there too that I can bring into the win-loss or vice versa. So it's just getting richer insights all around. I don't see this as a full-time role, other than you may want to have a program manager to administer it, because it takes, frankly, a lot of my time to go look at CRM reports, identify potential samples to include, reach out to the AE to validate the contacts, to update the tracking form that I use to communicate with the consultant so she knows when to pull the trigger. There's just a lot of program management involved.
And moving parts, right? There's a lot of stuff that has to happen, dominoes that have to fall in order to make this successful.
Yes. And so, if I could have another person assisting me with that part of it, that would be hugely valuable so that I could go focus on higher value things.
Hey, Penny's bosses, if you're listening, you should hire somebody, right?
Love it.
No, but that's a really good point. I feel like this is true of product marketers who have been tasked with doing competitive intelligence. If the company is seeing value in it, suddenly it's like, well, let's get another product marketer who's going to have product marketing duties, but something that they do every month, all the time, perhaps sometimes every day, is competitive intelligence. They sort of have a focus. So in your mind, it may not necessarily ever be a full-time job or your full-time job, but it could be 75% of somebody's job, a program manager that stays connected to other parts of the business. But ultimately, this is, it's no longer tedious for them. It's something that is a regular thing, and they are able to modulate their responsibilities list as a result of that dedication, that focus.
Right.
So are you hiring? I mean, what does the job title look like for a role like that? I mean, are you looking for an analytical person, somebody who may have come from one of the big investment firms, like a quantitative analyst, or are you looking for someone who has that sort of the passion for customers, like what type of a person would you hire for a role like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say somebody with, project management skills and that is able to build a relationship with the sales team, because it's a lot of conversations with them to, get them to give the right contacts, give the go ahead on some of the closed won deals. Sometimes we have to wait. It's a timing issue. We have to wait for all the paperwork, like the statement of work, to be signed and things. So it's somebody who's good at relationships with the sales team, but also good at program management.
I've just spent 40 some odd minutes talking to Penny Moran from Zuora about her career in win-loss programs. And I feel like, well, I could keep doing it for like 3 hours more. Not only is this a challenging analytical discipline that's really fascinating for me, but Penny's just like a really nice person and like a wonderful conversationalist. So I hope you too enjoyed the ride. But before we finished up, I had one more question for Penny. One more thing I needed to know. What was the right time to start putting a win-loss program together? What is the jumping off point? What would be the inciting incident that gives a product marketer or a competitive intelligence expert the desire to put a win-loss process in place?
I think the right time is when you don't really have a good pulse on why you win and why you lose. Just keep in mind that if it's just the internal program I talked about with account teams, having kind of one-off conversations about deal debriefs, you don't really know. The beauty of this program is that, like I was talking about earlier, is when you start to aggregate key themes, you can share that broadly across the field sales organization and have the entire team benefit from those insights. Whereas if you're just having internal deal debriefs, it's limited to just the people in that conversation, and those insights aren't getting shared broadly. So I think start now.
Start now. I love it. That's it. That's the ball game. Here's the buzzer, and our time together is up. If you're interested in getting started with your own competitive win-loss program, don't just use this podcast as your training materials. There's plenty on this topic out there on the World Wide Web. Penny mentioned quite a few resources from industry organizations, and once again, I cannot say enough about Alex McDonald's online training on win-loss analysis that you can find on the Product Marketing Alliance's website. Now, if you've got a topic within the realm of competitive intelligence, and that includes win-loss analysis, that you want to talk about on a future podcast, don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me, Erik Mansur, on the PMA Slack team. Just look for me in the Competitive Intel channel. Or send me an email at Erik, that's E-R-I-K, at crayon.co. You've just listened to the Product Marketing Alliance's podcast, Into the Fray, presented by Crayon. Just a massive thank you to Penny Moran from Zuora for being our guest on the show. And if you enjoyed the podcast, we'd love it if you could hit the subscribe button, either on Apple, Spotify, or on Crayon or the PMA's YouTube channels, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really liked our conversation, like really, really liked it, we'd love it if you could let us know by giving us a 5-star review. I'm Erik Mansur, and until next time, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you get out there and compete like you mean it.